Okay, good morning, guys. Can you hear me? Okay, my name is Jason Lueken, and I head up our Precision Ag department. I want to spend a few minutes this morning talking to you about developing a plan for fall. So, who in here, show of hands, has a detailed plan going into spring? Several people, right? We know which fields are going to which crop. We know which hybrids, varieties we're going to plant where. We know what our herbicide program is. We've got a very detailed plan. Who has that same level of detailed plan going into fall? A couple of you, but not near as many. Okay? What's the first thing on our mind going into fall? Get her done. Get the crop out, right? So harvest. We've got to get the combine ready, grain carts, trucks, dryer, grain handling facility. All that stuff has to be ready, right? Okay? But I want to spend a few minutes today talking to you about some other things that we need to be thinking about and developing a plan for. First thing is grid soil sampling. So why do we need to pull a soil sample in the fall? Know what your crop pulled out of it and what you're working with, right? We got to know what we got before we can make a plan for fertilizer. Has fertilizer gotten any cheaper the past year? Heck no. Okay. So if we have an idea what we're dealing with, we can be a little bit more intentional with what we're going to put back out there, because we sure don't want to waste it, do we? No. So probably one of the biggest the feedback I get the most from guys of why they don't want a grid soil sample is they think it's too expensive. It costs too much. So on average, it takes about 1/3 of a ton of lime to pay for the grid soil sampling. Okay, so it doesn't take a whole lot of lime savings to pay for it. The other added bonus you get is you get the fertilizer prescriptions. So you get a fertilizer prescription for your DAP and your potash, so you can be a little bit more intentional on where that fertilizer is going to go. Okay, does that make sense? So my challenge to you is, if you're not doing grid soil sampling and you're just doing what I call the random or the composite samples, talk to us. Let's pick a field, pick a farm, and let's do some grid soil sampling and see if we can't maybe make your operation a little bit more efficient. Okay, so what are we going to do on those acres that we're not soil sampling? We're going to put fertilizer on them, right? But how are we going to put that fertilizer back? Removal. Are we going to variable rate spread it, or are we going to flat rate spread it? Some people say variable, some people are going to flat rate it. So let's look at this example up here. You've all seen yield maps before. So this field, and it doesn't matter the yield, right? It's all relative. But this field averaged 230 bushel per acre, okay? If I look at this green area over here, it averaged 284, okay? So if I do my removals on this, on the average part of the field, I'm going to remove 355 pounds of fertilizer, DAP and potash, okay? So if I flat rate that across the whole field, all of a sudden, what happens over here in the really good part of the field? It gets shorted, right? But I've saved money, right? Because I'm not putting as much fertilizer there. Is that the part of the field we want to be saving money? No. Because you're shorting that crop. That's our most productive, most efficient area of the field. And if we start shorting those areas year after year after year, we're going to start seeing that yield come down. Okay, does that make sense? So let's look at the other side of the scenario. So those poor yielding areas of the field, the hilly parts, the parts around the trees, things like that, they don't yield as well. By putting more fertilizer out there, is it going to yield better? Probably not. That's probably not our limiting factor. So why am I going to put 355 pounds of fertilizer on those spots of the field where I really should only be putting 280? Okay, so I'm wasting money. I'm wasting fertilizer there. Does that make sense? So think to yourself, if I've got yield mapping capabilities and I'm not doing this, should I be? Well, I don't know. Let's try a farm. Let's try a field. Okay? Talk to your Superior Ag representative, and we can work one of these up for you. Any questions? Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. So who's using fall cover crops? Quite a few people. What's the biggest challenge in the fall to cover crops? getting them established. It's got to be done timely, right? We got to get them in before things cool down. We don't want to be planting our fall cover crops the 1st of November. That's usually not real successful. So don't let this variable rate fertilizer stand in the way of you doing fall cover crops, okay? Because what we can do with these John Deere spreaders, they have what they call a multiplier bed. So there's 2 bins in those. So what we can do is we can pull 100 pounds of potash out of this rec and flat rate that with your cover crop and still variable rate your P&K blend to satisfy the yield removal. Okay, so a lot of people don't know we have that capability. What's something else some people do in the fall? Involves a piece of tillage equipment. All right, some people do a little bit of fall tillage. Sometimes it's just a vertical till tool to help size that residue so we get faster breakdown, a little better seed bed in the spring. One thing we want to watch out, if we're going to pull soil samples, make sure this is part of your plan that you communicate with us. If we're going to pull soil samples, it's a much better practice to pull the soil sample before the fall tillage than after, right? Because once we loosen that top inch and a half of soil, it's a lot harder to get an accurate soil sample because that's loose and it sometimes wants to fall out of the soil probe, okay? So make sure we know that you're going to do fall tillage as part of your soil sampling program so we can maybe get out there in front of you with the tillage tool. Same thing with manure. I know a lot of guys are using litter, maybe spreading some of that in the fall. We need to make sure we're pulling those soil samples before we make that manure application because those can skew your soil sample results also. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we're going to summarize here a little bit. So a couple things. The falls are getting more compressed, right? This year's going to be no different. This late planting is going to probably compress this fall even more. There's going to be as many things to do, but less amount of time to do it. So get with your Superior Ag representative. Let's think about this now. Let's develop the plan. What fields need to be soil sampled this fall? What fields am I going to put crop removals on? What fields are going to get cover crop on so we can go ahead and know to write those equations a little bit differently. And then lastly, by being able to do these soil samples and these crop removals, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of, well, how much fertilizer do I really need to put on? It takes the emotion out of it, right? Okay, so take this quote, develop your plan now, and execute that plan. I know I get pushback some years, well, if I plan, it's always going to change. Yeah, it will change. But if you don't have a plan, you're just riding by the seat of your pants.